Hi.
Yeah, we're just talking about dealing with this kind of these technological limitations. But if I had my way, I'd get you all down on a minivan, and we'd see these sites and experience them, and then go have lunch at Old Salty's or something like that.
Hmm. I've been to a lot of these sites, not to Old Salty's, but
But we'll try to see if we can unlock a bit more of some of these sites, and also work from some of your own observations on these sites, because I will, when people look at these sites with fresh eyes, they will notice things that I might not have ever noticed before. And so that's great grist for the mill for me. Annabelle, I might just mention that in the last class we had together, I was a bit in mystery about a particular incident that happened just north of Chestertown. Annabelle had an explanation right away, and it made amazing sense to me, partly because she knew from stories of some of her kinfolk what could happen on the roads north of Chestertown back in the 1930s. So any kind of experience that we can bring to this, either our observation or our own knowledge of happenstance and tales told from one generation to another, especially on the shore, I think that'll all be useful for us. And so we're just going to try to be a knowledge collective today. I'll help out a little bit and nudge a little bit here and there, because I want us to work on this idea of deep focus, which that's how I call it. And welcome everyone, the live audience, as well as those of you who are following this discussion on recorded Zoom. Welcome to our session, Writing About Harriet Tubman's Native Land, Is It Unchanged? And what I'm going to do is introduce you to a few of the subjects that I have dealt with in the book that has just come out not too long ago. Also, this book is going to be officially launched on September 23rd at Harriet Tubman State Park from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and you're welcome to join us in the festivities. So, but before that, you're going to get a preview, and that's what we want to talk about today, but you're going to help me do the preview. So I'm going to have you do a couple of exercises for me. And again, we have no final exam, no grades. So I want you to just tell me what comes into your head. Are you able to see an image right now?
Yes.
Everybody?
Yes.
Okay. All right. For those of you who haven't seen this image before, just name things that you see here in this image that would not have been there before the arrival of people from across the Atlantic.
The buildings, the farmland.
The workers. We have white people, white men, looks like, working.
Census.
Slaves.
What else?
Slaves,
Possibly.
maybe?
You could, and you notice that they have been relegated to the background. We could make some guesses about the nature of Southern Planter magazine, and the way that the people that are doing a lot of the manual labor are in the background. Okay, is there much else that you can tell me about things that are living, animal or vegetable, other than people?
Well, did the Indians have wheat? It looks like wheat sheaves on the ground. I don't think they had wheat, did they?
No, they did not. And way back when in Delmarva, they didn't even have maize. That came later as it spread from Mexico, into further into North America. But this is wheat, so it's pretty clear that's what they've brought with them to grow on this particular location. Anything else that they wouldn't have encountered? that you wouldn't have seen on the same site back before the first arrival of Europeans and Africans?
Fence.
Yeah. What about animal and vegetable? You've given me vegetable.
Oh, the horses or mules, whatever they are. And I think there's a cow in the background. I'm not clear on what it is.
Yeah, I'm not so sure myself. It gets pretty hazy there in the background. So you have farm animals that would not have been on this continent. Okay. Anything else that, if you look carefully, anything, let's say, technological in nature?
Well, I see something on wheels. Those
A
two
plow?
Yeah.
pulling thing. Yeah, is that a plow?
Okay. What time of year do you think this is based on what you see in the foreground?
Harvesting time.
So what might we have? I mean, we can only guess at this. What
I don't know if
be back there?
Did they know about planting cover crops? I mean, why would they be harvesting and plowing at the same time?
Well, maybe it's not a plow.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was thinking. If it's pretty hard to see what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a date for this. My guess is that it may even be a threshing machine, which would be a nice thing to put on your masthead, right? Because the Southern Planter, hey, we have the latest technology. We're committed to the most efficient methods of agriculture, even if we depend upon enslaved labor to make it happen. So those are a couple of the things. When I give a similar image to my students in the old days, when I did that, I threw in Kentucky bluegrass. I threw in plants that were, or trees that were introduced. You can have an interesting experience doing this. But this one was pretty straightforward. Now, let's go to something maybe a little tiny bit more challenging. Okay, we've talked about this. Horses, mules, a reaper, certainly use of the wheel as a practical way of either of harvesting or carrying a heavy load, wooden buildings, fences, wheat, yada, yada, yada. Now, here's your second image. Let's imagine Harriet Tubman, who died in the early 20th century. Let's imagine her going into a time capsule sometime in 1905 and emerging in front of the Brodus farm, back where her so-called owner lived. And now she has come through the dimension of time to the 21st century, and she sees the farm. What is she going to notice is a little bit out of whack?
Just an electrical wire going, looks like a telephone pole, guy wired. I can't see that it has a wire up there, but I'm guessing.
But yeah, that's a good guess. It could be electric, the electric wire as well, because I don't know if there's any other source of electrical current for the house that stands there today, which is a house used seasonally by hunters. It's rented out to hunters.
Will she be surprised by the soybeans?
Ah, soybeans. Yeah, what would she make of soybeans? She would not have had any experience whatsoever with soybeans. It would be as if you went down the road from wherever you're living now through the fields of the Eastern Shore or the Western Shore, and all of a sudden you see some crazy looking pink crop grown across a large field and producing some strange fruit in the shape of who knows, in the shape of a disc or something like that. It would have to be something almost out of Edgar Rice Burroughs on the Martians. It would be awfully odd. And this, though it's green, would be odd to her as well. Is there anything more about the soybeans themselves that might be odd to her?
Planted in rows like that, mechanically planted.
Yeah, it's awfully uniform, isn't it? Do you see anything else growing there?
No intercropping.
Mm-mm. Just
Mono-
monoculture, right?
Yeah.
Okay, anything else you see that she wouldn't have seen?
Well, certainly that metal gate.
Oh,
Yeah,
Mhm.
they would not have had the aluminum to do that, and they certainly wouldn't have paid for a metal gate of that sort. They just would have had a wooden gate that they could have fashioned pretty easily from the abundant timber in the area.
When did soy
Okay,
go up on the eastern shore?
it would have happened right around a little before, a little after World War II, if I remember correctly.
Oh, that recently. Okay.
Yeah. It may have, at least in other parts of the country, it may have been associated with, New Deal agricultural policy, if I'm not mistaken, and here on the shore, it may have come a little bit later, but it, of course, transformed the industry. Okay, so let's see what we've kind of looked at here. Okay, we've got soybeans, as you've noticed, monoculture, metal gates, metal signs. We didn't talk about the signs. There's an electric pole. And the question is in fact, are there things in this landscape, and more broadly speaking, the landscape of Harriet Tubman's Eastern Shore, that are unchanged? And that's the kind of question I want us to explore today. Okay, this is where we're going to start. We're going to try to look at what is virtually unaltered. And here's the quote: "A rare landscape virtually unaltered for more than a century." Virtually unaltered. And what I want to do today, if we can, as a group, is to see in what ways or how might the Dorchester landscape be virtually unchanged, with an emphasis on virtual. That's what we're going to try to get a handle on today.
Would the field
But I
have
want to
been
get,
would the field have been that large? If you're working it by hand, it's pretty hard to work the acreage that our mechanically aided farmers do today. You know, if you're got a plow behind a horse.
I think you were right about that, Annabelle. If you are doing a monoculture, you're going to have a hard row to hoe with that much going on. On the other hand, I'm going to leave part of that question unanswered for now, because there may be more things going on that property than just a single a single farm of one crop. So let's put a pin in that, as they say, and we'll get back to that question. But here's the famous quote that became the basis of our subtitle: "The old home is not there." And this is Harriet Tubman in her recollections to Sarah Bradford Hopkins in it's in both Tubman biographies. This is Harriet Tubman as she's just passed the line. She has crossed the line into Pennsylvania, and we're going to get to that. Some of you already know the passage that goes ahead of this and goes behind it, if you got my advance material. Otherwise, we're just going to take it one quote at a time. I'll try to do this as best I can. "I know of a man who was sent to a state penitentiary for 25 years. All these years, he was thinking about his home, counting by years, then months, then days when he should be freed and see his family and friends once again. The years roll on and the time of imprisonment is over. He is free. He leaves the prison gates, makes his way home, but the old home is not there. The house in which he had dwelt in his childhood had been torn down, and a new one had been put up in its place. His family was gone. Their name was forgotten. There was no one to take him by the hand to welcome him back to life. Now, this is a woman who ought to be exhilarated that she has crossed the line, that she is no longer in the lion's paw. She is no longer enslaved. She is a free person now in a free land. So how can we explain what her feelings are at this point?
Some nostalgia.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think sometimes you think, did I make the right move? And, you know, will I ever be able to go back? And what will be there if I do go back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think
that's a very good point.
I think she knows that she's in a land where it'll be so different. And she's having the same kinds of feelings as if there's no one there to take her by the hand and welcome her back to life.
Mhm. Yeah,
Maybe
the system that she grew up to understand is gone. Mhm.
Maybe she's thinking that she can be the person to hold the hand of those who will follow her north.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, she feels an emptiness herself. She compares it with an emptiness in the landscape, but it's an emptiness obviously within her heart. Any other thoughts?
She had previously, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead, Barbara.
she had previously been so familiar with the landscape as she
Mhm.
brought other people north, and suddenly it's not the same landscape. And so I think that there's, to some extent, a feeling of not being able to do what she had been doing.
Yeah, a physical dislocation. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think somebody else started to hit the nail on the head when they said, yeah, I think it gave her some insight into, as you know, which helped her, which she later proved, as we know from history, what she was able to do was she was freeing herself and other people, helping other people to understand what they were going to have to go through when she freed them, that things were going to be different.
If I can add, I think that there's other quotes from exactly the same time where she does talk about the air cleaner, the sky brighter, right? I mean, she has both sets of feeling like I'm free, I'm free. So I think that needs to be seen at the same time. But as I was watching recently some reforms in the criminal justice system here, when people get out, even if they're welcomed by family, in a very practical sense, getting a job and feeding yourself and being safe is quite it's hard for anyone, right? If you switch locations. So in some sense, and I appreciate the poetic and emotional side of what she's saying, there's some really practical problems, right? She's got to eat, she's got to be somewhere, she's got to remain safe. There's also bounty hunters in the north. So I think part of that is just now what? If I may.
Yeah, it's a real vulnerability, and a vulnerability that she has no, she in fact, she doesn't say this, but she may have some inklings as to where she goes and who she reports to. But nominally, she's there by her lonesome, literally. And that's where I want to get into the two pieces of the paragraph that precedes the quote and the paragraph that comes after the quote. So she had crossed the line. No one could take her now, and she would never call any man master again. I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now that I was free. There was glory over everything. You recognize that. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields. I felt like I was in heaven, but then came the bitter drop in the cup of joy. She was alone and her kindred were in slavery, and not one of them had the courage to dare what she had dared. Unless she went to liberate them, she would never see them again or even know their fate. And then she goes on after she makes the comparison with the prisoner. The prisoner's story goes in the middle here. And she goes on, so it was with me. I had crossed the line of which I'd so long been dreaming. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me in the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. And my home, after all, was down in the old cabin quarter with the old folks, my brothers and sisters. But to this solemn resolution I came. I was free. They should be free also. I would make a home for them in the north, and the Lord helping me, I would bring them all there. Any comments on what she's saying here?
She's saying how hard it is to be free.
Mm-hmm.
That she
Yeah,
was
she
going to
put
have to
everything literally on the line to cross the line. Mhm.
But then she was determined to help others also become free, even at that point, right after she got her freedom. She was thinking of all the others that she still wanted to be free.
And why is it that you think she said, well, listen, and I can supply a little information here. I tried doing this a few days ago with two of my brothers, and we went out and they chickened out after 3 days, so we all came back in. Who needs it?
I think she states it very well here.
Mm-hmm. And remember, we're talking. Sorry.
No, I was thinking there may have been a few other former slaves who crossed back into slave territory for purposes like she did, but not very many. Of all the ones that made the escape, not many turned around and came back. You know, it's
possible. It's possible that people would have come back. The boundaries, I believe personally, were a lot more elastic, and the landscape was a lot more elastic than you might think from movies and things like that, especially compared with places farther south where you had farther to go and even more heavy enforcement along the way. It is also, are there other ways that she might have learned about the North and how to manage in the North if she did not talk to somebody personally?
Didn't she connect with some people in Philadelphia that helped her out?
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that in Dorchester?
Well, in Dorchester County, I don't know.
What would have been your other sources of news or information about the possibility of going north? Where if people didn't come down and tell you this is how you do it, let's just say let's say we didn't have we didn't have people going down. Would we have had other recourses to learn more about how to do this?
Well, there were Quakers and some Methodists that were some white folks on the Underground Railroad, and they were freer to go back and forth. I don't know how many of them did. Most of them were just in their own spot, helping things along. But there was a Quaker office in Philadelphia that somebody showed her to. I don't know how she quite found it.
Well, let's think about the ways that information might have been communicated. It could have happened, as you say, incidentally, with somebody passing through who was trustworthy. But there were other ways that information came through as well. Any other thoughts about that?
Would it not be through sort of religious singing or any other kind of coded communications ministers that go back and forth, free slaves
Mhm.
that can get back and forth.
That's a possibility. And later on in Dorchester County, we will have a minister who gets in trouble, not actually because they catch him passing along information, but because they search his house and he has a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that's enough to put him away for a while. But it so happened that his son got away, and we get the impression maybe that information was passed along, maybe not even directly to the father, but passed along. Imagine if you were living in Canada, you decide, I'm getting out of here. You know, I'm going to go all the way to Canada. And so I end up in St. Catharines, which is where Harriet Tubman ends up fairly early on in her career, at least for a while, before she begins her different exploits. But you can write a letter, but you write it coded, and maybe you write a verse or two out of the Bible. So that's one way you could, in fact, there are some specific references in this kind of information being communicated from the north to people in Dorchester. And the people and the authorities would confiscate a letter, check it, and they say, and they would even, when they gave it to the person, they'd say, what's being hidden here? And sometimes the person who got the letter would say, I'm not really sure what they're talking about here. It doesn't make sense to me, but it would make sense to somebody else that he would share it with later on. The other possibility is something that comes from a phrase that we all know from a few decades back. Ever hear about hearing it from the grapevine?
Yeah.
The original grapevine was something called the grapevine telegraph. Think about that. It was a telegraph that was not linear, but actually branching out into many different locations. And in the book, I have a reference from Booker T. Washington about the grapevine telegraph. So information can go from person to person to person to person, and it just doesn't go on a linear way. It goes from one person who passes it along to his settlement, another person who passes it along to his settlement, and goes on from there. So there could be a lot of information going back and forth that could have been helpful. And we know that either because of her knowledge of the timberlands in Dorchester and Caroline County, or more broadly speaking, the basic geography of Delmarva, maybe through the grapevine, she knew that if she continued to follow one of the major rivers toward its source, she would end up in a sweet spot that would lead her then to Delaware and to get her north. So, okay, so here it is. She's saying, I'm not only going to make my way and survive here, but I'm also going to do everything I possibly can to see that my family members get out. And that's going to be quite an effort over the next couple of years. You'll see some of this in the book, but you can see it in some of the biographies and even some of the most recent information by record keepers who were involved in maintaining the Underground Railroad records north of the line, since you couldn't do it south of the line. And in the case of two brothers, she went back, I think it's 3 times before they finally joined her, for reasons that we can't really go into today. Okay, so if you look at the prisoner's story, you know, there's a possibility she's going to lose track of her family. They're going to disappear just like the prisoner's family disappeared. And what's even worse about that is it's possible that they will be sold south by a Georgia trader, because that was, after all, what motivated her leaving. She knew that the Broadus family, the widow Broadus, was in trouble and wasn't sure whether she could make it by hiring out enslaved people within her household, and whether it would be better off just getting money. And every year a Georgia trader at the end of the year would come by, and he would stay in a local Cambridge hotel, and you would go in and you'd make a deal, and then they would be sent south, either by boat or on foot in a coffle. Again, some of this you can see in the book or in other references. Because then the other question, of course, is if they are on different sides of the Mason-Dixon line, will there ever be a way for them to connect again? Will she go back to the lion's paw? Will they be willing to struggle in the lion's paw to come back? Would she go down and never persuade them to come? Well, it's nice to see you, but I've got my life here. And as you know, sometimes you can make a wide variety of excuses to justify you're not taking a radical action to change your life. So any of you who are familiar with the Harriet Tubman story, do you remember one instance where she goes down and somebody says, no way, I'm not going north. I'm quite happy here and I'm going to stay here?
Sister, isn't it? One of her sisters?
No.
No?
One of her sisters was actually, two of her sisters were sold south, which
That
made
was
it even more.
Yeah. Before she leaves.
Mm-hmm. And people, just by not hearing anything from their kinfolk, that was awfully ominous. And in fact, the people that did record keeping of selling people south, and there were instances, for example, in Wycomico County, somebody says, I'm going to start a plantation, but before I can get down there, I'm going to sell south, or I'm going to bring south my labor force and then hire them year by year. And we learn about abysmal rates of death in what would have been, quote unquote, seasoning, adjusting to the diseases down there, and having to deal with the horrible labor of preparing areas for cotton plantation, out of the wilderness. Then of course there's the question: what if she does go down? She might not find him. It'd be like the family. The family's gone somewhere in the story of the prisoner. Can she even catch up with them again? Find out where they are?
Or she goes back a lot sooner than 25 years. Once she gets to the north, she comes back relatively soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's realizes that, again, this is a matter of time.
Mm-hmm.
For her, it could be any year now, any December, where Eliza Brodus will sell one or two or all of the family members to get that big wad of cash versus hiring them out for yet another year. By the way, I never answered the question I asked you. Her husband, who actually was a free man, her husband not only didn't feel any threat because he was free, nobody could sell him, but secondly, he thought she was being hysterical. Of course, that's easy if you're free and you're not in the lion's paw. But what he said about her was, you're like the old guy that is sitting on the steps and hears a joke and doesn't get it until 15 minutes later. And he always kind of made fun of her, I think. And he's saying, you're worried about a threat that's no longer present, just like you'd get a joke 15 minutes after the punchline. Anyway, so he's not coming. And in fact, he's already remarried, assuming that she wouldn't have survived this kind of a trek. And then finally, what happens to the old house, the cabin, in the cabin quarter? Well, in Dorchester County, if you don't maintain things on a year-to-year basis, as some of us all know who've been armed with paintbrushes and sandpaper, whatever building it is ain't going to last very long. Okay, so the thesis of the book is basically, yes, change comes to Dorchester. Things are changing even in her lifetime, personal, economic, political, technological, environmental. But Harriet Tubman, what she did and her story has in many ways transcended many changes and still speaks to us today. And so what I want to do is to see a little bit, try to see if we can get a bit more of the story just by, again, looking at landscapes and trying to sort out what they were like in her day, and then see if we can make a case for parts of her landscape, her native land being virtually unaltered. So I'm going to take us on a short driving tour through different parts of Dorchester. This will be related a bit to what I talk about in chapters 1 and 2, but also will bring in some of the material from the remaining chapters where I try to bring together her story as she tells it, or at least it's reported that she tells it, versus context that helps you to understand the why and wherefore of what she's talking about. Okay. And what we're going to do, I'm going to suggest to you that we utilize a technique they use in cinema called deep focus, but we're going to use it a little differently. First, we'll use it literally, then we'll use it in a broader sense. Are you familiar with the term deep focus? Can anybody give me like an example or a definition? In cinema. Anybody see Citizen Kane? Orson Welles' film from the 40s. If you watch that film, you'll find it's almost sometimes a little distracting, because what he has done essentially is that he will sometimes arrange the camera shots and angles and degree of focus to the point where the background is clearer. There's more going on in the background than there is in the foreground. And he means that because you might have two people talking in the foreground, but he wants you to focus on what is going on as a counterpoint in the background. So he played around with this with his photographer, his cinematographer, in a lot of different ways. And what I want to do is look at that literally and metaphorically. And the first deep focus I guess I could suggest to you, here is a close-up of the Brodus farm in the wintertime. I might add right now, just for our own benefit, these buildings were not from Harriet Tubman's time. We'll get to that in just a minute. These are more recent buildings, and as I say, the hunters rent them seasonally. Okay. Some of you have already made the trip to Harriet Tubman's, to the Brodus farm and elsewhere in Harriet Tubman's native land. As you are going down the road, immediately on either side of the road, let's say you're going toward Bucktown, for example, but any of these roads, before you get too close to the Blackwater River, what do you see immediately beyond the road? Immediately beyond the road?
Corn stubble.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You're going to see agricultural land, sometimes on both sides of the road, because the road just happens or has been intended to go right through perhaps two pieces of property. So you've got going down to Bucktown, the land is a little bit higher, generally speaking. And so you've got some nice agricultural land on both sides. Occasionally you'll lose it a little bit on one side versus another. So with that in mind, what might we be looking at in the background here using deep focus behind the farm?
Trees.
Trees and woods. Yeah.
Okay. Now, given that you could probably, let's assume right now, this is completely imaginary. I don't know who owns that property anymore, but let's assume right now that it would have been about the size of Brodus's original property, which went forever and a day, even farther back. Why wouldn't, let's say that you gained that piece of property, why wouldn't you knock down those trees and add to your agricultural output?
You don't have enough labor to do that.
Mm-hmm. That could be, although you can certainly do a lot with a tractor these days.
Yeah.
Could there be some other, impediment that prevents them from going any farther?
It's too
Marsh.
swampy.
Marshland.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking was
Yeah.
low country down there.
Thinking,
It's such low country down there. It could be marshland. It could be.
yeah, those of us who are Dorcastrians, we know our county slogan is water moves us. Yeah, sometimes water moves us out of a neighborhood like Holland Island, but generally you're never far from a water course. And what I tried to show you here, which is not necessarily the best rendition of it, is that you've got if you're looking for water, you've got it all over the place. You've got streams, you've got branches of streams, you've got creeks, and you've got wetlands all over the place. So the people that settled this area, they found the best high land, and they cleared it of trees, and that's where they set up shop. And I'm guessing, based on this map, among other things, they're probably beyond those. Yeah, they've got some trees there, but beyond those trees, it's going to be land that you're not going to do very well with. And so they have found the optimal farmland way back when, back in the early 19th century, if not the late 18th century. And so even today, perhaps the configuration of the land is very much built around the quote unquote available land that would not be prohibitively complicated or impractical to make useful in agriculture. So when you're going down to Bucktown, the famous Bucktown store from Cambridge, and you're taking Bucktown Road, you see these trees that may front both sides, beautiful farms, and then this hedge of trees on the edge. In both cases, you can almost certainly imagine this was not abandoned farmland. This just happens to be an area that begins to get a little bit rough in terms of a water course, or even open swamp or marshland. Okay, now this is something that I didn't even know until a couple of years ago. But if you've gone down Bucktown Road toward the Bucktown store, just before you turn the corner and see the Scots United Methodist Chapel and get to the Bucktown store, there's a curious little thing here. I just want to mention it to you because it's another one of those things that help to form the landscape. And I'm guessing that Harriet Tubman would have known about it. Very few people know about it today. Now, if you looked at the left-hand picture, I have an arrow in front of a little tiny pond. You can barely see the pond on that map. If you look at Google Earth, I've made the pond a bit bigger in the middle. Can you follow that? If you go to the right-hand side, you can see the pond is kind of hidden behind some bushes, but you're going to pass right by it as you make your turn toward Scott's Chapel. Anybody want to take a wild guess what that pond could have come from?
Just heavy rain that occurred and just made it bigger in that at one time?
Well, it could have been. We don't know the original size. It may have been larger. It may have been smaller. And I'm saying the only reason I know this is because I know of some land records, and I know of a very logical way this would have happened. Anyway, if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, you'll notice that they've marked out a course of water, the pond, and then the course of water continues. That might be Hall's Branch, I'm not sure. What if I told you it was a beaver pond?
Oh my God.
Way back before the last beaver was killed, which was fairly early on in Dorchester County. You know, I think the last bear was killed in Dorchester County, which was, I think, comparatively late for the Eastern Shore. They found about the last bear on Delmarva, or at least in the Eastern Shore, in Dorchester County in the woods, probably back in, I don't know, maybe the late 18th, early 19th centuries. But this would have been a beaver pond originally. And that's part of the story. The other part of the story is that wherever you have a dam and a pond, that's where you put your road. Have you heard of that before?
No.
Yeah.
We had state laws that even when you build a mill pond, the state had the right to build a road on top of it, or even, according to some laws, would have required you to put a road on the top of it.
Why?
Now, why would it be logical to use a dam as your crossing of a stream?
Because it's firmer.
It's a good solid base, especially a mill pond. You know,
Yeah.
they're going to build those to last. But the other thing is, where do you decide where to put a dam for a mill pond?
Oh, we need flowing water.
Mhm.
The beaver knows.
Yeah, the beaver knows. But you're going to find a place where you can get the most bang for the buck, which means you want the shortest place to create the dam, because you're not building Hoover Dam. You're not building Grand Coulee. You're just trying to block up the darned water so that the water will pond up for your purposes, right? So beaver dams or mill dams were located at very strategic points then, where they had a narrow spot where they could put this dam up and then let the water fill up on the other side. And that narrow spot was a narrow crossing then of a river or something that otherwise could have been a little more challenging to put a bridge over. So anyway, here you can see that the people that built the road, probably not exactly the road crew, the SHA or something, but the people that built this, were trying to connect with Bucktown, said, hey, this is where we can get across Hall's Branch. So we'll go ahead and fill this all in, and there'll be egress for the water underneath. And there's still the pond. Okay, I just wanted to mention that to you because these are the kinds of things you begin to start to notice. Can anybody think of a good example of a road going over a large mill pond or beaver pond? This one I can give you is on the way to Highway 50 on the way to Salisbury. And you won't miss it. Once you see it, you'll never forget it again. It's, I forget, it's the, let's see, it's the Chickamaucomico River. And it's even marked on the highway as the Chickamaucomico River. If you're going towards Salisbury on the left, you will see where the mill used to be. On the right, you'll see the mill pond. And it was an artificial mill pond, as far as I know. They dammed it up to, and that was naturally where they were going to get across the Chickamaucomico on the road, because they had the right to do so, and it was the most convenient way to cross that river. Okay, I'm just going to mention this quickly because these things always complicate the issue a little bit. When we see the Bucktown store in Bucktown, are we seeing the store, And there's reason to argue that perhaps we do. It's not 100% though, because there was actually a second Bucktown store, at least I think even at the time there might have been 2 stores in Bucktown. And as you know, there was no reason why the smallest village couldn't have 2 or 3 general stores, for reasons we really can't explore. But here is one of the oldest maps of the district. And you see, if you look at that, Bucktown Road, there was a store where the Bucktown store is today. And there was one right as you kind of turn the corner to head toward the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park. I put arrows on the left-hand side where that other store probably was. So if we are looking at the right store, which we very well might be, we are looking at one to the exclusion of another store, but we're also looking at something that did not rot, over the century. So it was either painstakingly maintained, or little by little, it just pieces as they rotted were replaced, and it's remained today. They've not done what do you call it, a dendrochronological test yet, so we can't say for sure whether there's some old pieces. I do know when the store was restored more recently, I think in the 60s or 70s, the whole underside of it had to be, I think, replaced, because things between powder post beetles and just, rot, a lot had to be repaired. But for our purposes, we can certainly consider it, and certainly consider it as a place marker for the stores she might have seen. Okay, now before I go any further, I want to get back to some more landscapes, but I just want to tell you that one of the things we try to do in the book is to give you untold stories that help you to understand the incident at the Bucktown General Store. That was the incident. Does anybody remember what happens to Harriet at the Bucktown store?
The storekeeper was angry with another slave, and I don't remember why, but he goes to throw a weight, presumably this 2-pound one or something of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow she got in the way and had her head injury.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was actually not the storekeeper, but a overseer.
Oh.
Not an owner, quote unquote, but an overseer who was hired to be the SOB who kept everything going on the farm. So you could be the gentleman farmer and go play dice, downtown at the hotel. So he was being pursued, and we don't know a lot of the details of that, except we know the business about her getting in the way and preventing the overseer from her maybe striking her or striking him, and then she gets struck. But she's trying to give him a moment or two to get out there and run for it. So again, there are all sorts of questions we could look at involving that incident. Is it actually the store? We've talked about that already. What was the enslaved person doing there in the first place? Why is he there? Why has he taken time from his work to the point of having his overseer come and be prepared to thrash him? Why did he go there? What was Harriet Tubman doing there? What had she been doing just before she went there? And that leads to a joke that she used to tell about herself. Her sense of humor is quite extraordinary, and very often kind of a bit on the grim side. And she tells us almost a joke about what she did on the days before this injury that actually helped save her from maybe a fatal brain injury.
What she didn't do, she didn't comb her
No,
hair.
she didn't comb her
Hair was
hair. There was another part of it. There are two more parts of it. Does anybody know what she was doing when she was called on an errand to the store?
Was she catching muskrats?
No, that's much
No.
earlier in life. Now she's kind of an all-purpose household aide, I guess. More or less maybe working outside, but also inside as well. This might have been the period of time where she learned to be such a good pie maker and things like that. But she may have been doing an errand for her mother, actually, who might have been cooking. I'm not sure about that, but no, she had another job outside, a rather strenuous one. She was breaking flax. And if you want to know what flax is, breaking flax is, you'll read all about it in the book. But so she was breaking flax, and she was, when she'd have her lunch break, she didn't have a napkin, she'd wipe her fingers on her hair. So between, and so between the pieces of flax hull that landed on her and her, her trying to get the stuff off her fingers, she almost had a helmet. That's the joke she made about herself. Is that really true? No, but in the way that she sort of minimizes sometimes the impact of the stories. She said that. Well, that's what saved my life. I had almost like a bumper, there to protect me. Okay, you all know what the fracture did to her, I think.
Caused epilepsy.
A kind of, I can't remember the exact terminology, but anytime she was at rest, she could fall into a deep slumber. Okay, and so how does she compensate for that disability? Okay, every time I sit down, I'm going to fall asleep, and somebody's going to catch me at it, and I'm going to be in trouble. So what does she do to keep from falling asleep?
Keep moving.
Yeah. And in the book, you'll see a reference to someone who had a similar condition, who used to have an office job, and he chose heavy physical labor to keep active, so he would not fall asleep. Okay, so my suggestion here is that when you use a deep focus and you start reading into these stories, and as we hopefully have been able to achieve in this book, bring in not only the landscape as a context, but bring in what goes on with enslaved people. How do they interact with general stores? What's it like to break flax, and why would it be such a messy process? How would you deal with whatever it was, temporal lobe epilepsy? And how does that relate to your wanting very intense physical labor then during the daytime? Anyway, that's how we try to approach a lot of the stories that you're going to see related to Harriet Tubman's Dorchester years. I just mentioned that. Okay, let's go back to the farm for a minute. We're still making our way kind of toward the Blackwater River. And we go back to this scene, which you've already seen. We've talked about this a little bit before, but if you were to have your time travel goggles on right now and be looking at that farm, forget the fact that, well, yeah, so you've got a different building and you've got different things going on, different things growing there, right? What are the differences that we might be likely, what are the things we might be likely to see?
I don't know if this is related to what you're asking us to do, but every time I drive across that road, generally we're coming from Blackwater and going the other direction. I'm amazed at how much space there was that they had to walk. And the first thing that came to my mind is just getting to the house is a little bit of a hike in itself. I just can't imagine all the walking that particularly Harriet had to do, or anybody down there, to go from place to place. I mean, they didn't have vehicle. I mean, except for a horse and buggy, if they were lucky, somebody that you walked. I mean,
You walked, and you might have a few shortcuts here and there if you could take a footpath. But you had a pretty wide range of places, and to go to church or to have a prayer service with other Black folk. It could involve a lot of walking, and needless to say, very seldom is anyone who, quote, claims to be your owner is going to give you extra time to do what you got to do. Hey, I'm going to church on Sunday, or I want to visit my family on Sunday. Can I take off a little time on Saturday? Well, maybe not. So that's a very important aspect of this. Although occasionally a skiff or boat might help you out. But what would this farm have looked like when it was a practicing farm in the 19th century?
well, there'd be a lot of corn or whatever, a lot of product. I mean, it wouldn't be bare land like that, I wouldn't think.
Yeah. Would it be only corn?
Oh, I don't.
Possibly tobacco.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there could have been a little bit of tobacco, maybe, although might have that was not a commercial crop here. I don't know how much would have been commercial. A little bit of would have been commercial, but you've got a lot of things you could be growing for the household or to make money. So you might have separate plantings here and there, for not one thing. But what about all those animals?
We need pasture for the animal.
You're going to have horse pasture and probably a place for the cattle. Excuse me.
You would have
What else are you going to be?
cabins for the slaves and probably a nicer house for the master.
They'll have a house. And Brodus had his house that, I'm sorry, his stepfather built him that house while he was still about a year or so away from his majority, because Brodus's stepfather had married Brodus's mother, who had already been a widow. And so he built the house with, the estate that went to Brodus. And Brodus took him to court. He thought he was being cheated. And the only reason we know about the house is we know the specifics that were in the court documents. And Brodus tried to sue for more money because he felt he was being shortchanged. That didn't last long in the courts. But let's look at a couple of things. You were asking about the nature of the house. I've given you two possibilities here, one in the center and one on the end, on the right. The one on the right is actually part of a larger house. I've gotten rid of the two-story part of the house. Jay Meredith says this is, now it is a front for a fancy kitchen that is behind it. So they've actually rebuilt the back of it a bit. But looking at it from the front, it could look a lot like the house that Brodus would have had, that his stepfather built for him. Perhaps it did have the dormers, perhaps not. But a very basic house with a couple of rooms downstairs and and an attic, which might have been subdivided, might not have been. So any of you who saw the movie Harriet, you notice this is not anywhere near Terra. You don't have a fancy porch. You don't have a fancy white, spindles, on the edge of the porch. This is not Gone with the Wind. This was pretty basic accommodations. Now, the other thing I wanted you to notice, it's not the best example, but notice all of the outbuildings in this picture from 1860s Pennsylvania. On the left-hand side. What kind of outbuildings are you going to have on a farm?
slave quarters and
Mm-hmm,
A barn.
Barn. Mhm.
mm-hmm,
Sheds of various dimensions,
mm-hmm,
farm equipment.
mm-hmm.
An actual outhouse.
An outhouse, you better have that. You don't want to have to go all the way out there to those bushes, you know, the trees on the edge. And what about your chickens?
oh,
You know, you got to have something for them. You're going to have, you might have a milk, you know, a milk shed, which will provide some slight reduction in the temperature, so your milk products will last a little bit longer, maybe. You might have a place where your meat can be kept, you know, your cured meat.
Smoke.
Mhm. You may have a potato bank. And if you don't know about potato banking, it's just a way that you keep your potatoes after they've been harvested in the wintertime, and you can draw upon that throughout the season. It also serves as a rather handy place to hide out if you are on the way north, as you'll see in the book. Well, now, this is not a very good example. This is one of these idealized kind of Currier and Ives sorts of things. But look at all the animals we're talking about here.
oh my God, yeah.
We'll have a piggery, you know, we'll have a piggery there. We'll have our barnyard fowl. We'll have our cattle. You might have a goat, you know, I don't know about the goat, but you'll certainly have your horses. I mean, it's a real menagerie. And we're not even talking your dogs and cats. And in fact, we know that pigs were a pretty common thing because you know, pork was a rather inexpensive thing to produce with the scraps and things like that you had available. So even, you know, the scraps that were available on the pig could be passed along then to the quarters, you know, the little houses where enslaved people lived. Okay, now I've asked a question here. We've talked about domesticated animals. What other varmints might you find around the farm?
Mice, rats, raccoons, possums, fox,
Mm-hmm.
deer.
Yeah, they're all going to be around. They're not, and they're, you know, they're going to be out there where all those water courses are. So they'll be wandering around past your farm at night. And if the dogs aren't out there to chase them away, they'll try to get, you know, they may go after a chicken. You know, you just don't know. But anyway, they're out and about. And of course, the mice have a nice little place here and there in the houses and in the barns, you know, despite the cats. Oh, by the way, what are you feeding your horses?
Hay, straw. Yeah,
Yeah.
hay. Oh, yeah.
Maybe, you know,
Oh.
you could buy straw from, you could buy marsh hay, you know, or some, if you had it on your property, you could harvest it every year, you know, salt marsh hay and bring it in. And then what was the other thing?
Oats.
Yeah, oats grew very well here. You know, in fact, this was a very productive part of Dorchester County. So if you planned everything right and managed it well, it would definitely support you. Okay, let's move from the Brodus house. And now I want to take you down what is called Key Wallace Drive. Used to be called Old Mill Road because there was a mill at the crossing of the Blackwater River on the main highway in a convenient spot, you know. Anyway, I want you to take a look. This is the old topographical map and on the left. And describe the river for me.
Yeah. Meandering.
Okay. I've given you an approximation of that nearer where I live. This is World's End Creek. So this is what I would try. This is an image like this is what I would channel back in, back in Harriet Tubman's time. Kind of a marshy, low area that with this meandering little Blackwater River.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it can be shallow, I would have to think, in many places. You probably have to know it pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The channel right where you might notice the bridge back then was where the bridge is now.
Right.
So you have this immediate, if you're coming toward the Blackwater Refuge from Cambridge, you have this immediate hard right, almost a 90-degree angle. You've been going along a ridge of land, you have a 90-degree angle, and then you head across this kind of low area. But first you cross the Blackwater. This is where where the fishermen are. How does this look today?
Virtually
Those of you
unchanged.
who go,
Name.
have a look.
Road got
Can you
paved.
follow? Huh? Can you, if you look at the image on your left-hand side, that Blackwater River now looks like it's swollen. Like a swollen ankle or something like that. Do you see what you'll see a kind of a kind of a bluish yellow color. Do you see any real meandering anymore?
No, I see it's spreading out.
Yeah, that whole, let me go back and forth. Now you see the picture on the right-hand side. I would call that Lake Little Blackwater, Lake Little Blackwater, as opposed to Lake Blackwater, because the Blackwater has done the same thing in the last century or so. But let's go back. Okay, remember marshland, open, marshland, open, marshland, open. And what do you have? Originally the old road somehow got across that marshland. So I'm assuming maybe it was filled in some capacity. But it was probably pretty darn muddy. You probably couldn't go out at high speed until eventually you had the resources and probably a state government that would build the causeway, which you may have been able to see here, if you can. So imagine if Harriet Tubman got out of her time capsule there.
Oh,
She'd say, this is I can sort of recognize this bridge. I know where it is, even if it's not the same rickety wooden bridge. But as I look toward the west, what happened to the marsh? She may have said, I even trapped in those marshes. Now it's all water. What happened? Did you have a bad rainstorm? Did it flood? What the heck is going on here?
Just the other day we were down there, and I said to Al, I said, lately, I said, every time we come across here, it's looking like it's high tide. It's considerably higher than it was even a few years ago, because we used to fish there all the time until they stopped. I don't know why they put those signs up anymore, but I guess there's a reason for it. But
yeah, they still allow you to fish, but you've got to park over by the entrance to the wildlife drive.
We can't walk that far.
There are some signs that show, or aerial shots that show the growth of it due to sea level rise, right? It is a very significant issue, and it's killing all the trees around there and the like, right? That's gotten much, much more swollen due to sea level rise.
Yeah, you can see this happening almost. You can look at the aerial shots from the I think mid 1930s. You can get aerial shots from the late 1930s. Then you can get into the 40s and 50s. And we're going to see that in just a second, actually. Okay. Now, and even sometimes I might add, this goes along with the idea of it getting higher and higher. When there's a lot of rain for a good amount of time between that location in Cambridge, that water will even go over that causeway.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's
We-
something I'm used to in South Dorchester, but not up there on Key Wallace Drive.
Yeah.
Okay, have a look at this picture. This is Tobacco Stick, which is now called Madison. And this is where, after her injury, Harriet got annual contracts working with her father. Her father was doing the logging operation for John Stewart, I believe it was. And so she was, she got married around that time. She's not spending much more time at the Brodus family, with the Brodus household. But she's getting around because she has to go where the timber is. And so the center of that operation is there in Madison. Now, this is an 1847 coastal survey chart, essentially, to help you find your way around the Little Choptank River. Now, can you identify, just by guessing, what these different, what are these kind of squarish things that we see on the map?
Fields, lots, building
Marsh-
lots.
Marshland, just marshes. I mean, the land.
Okay.
in the middle of our-
Yeah, if you look at the brighter colors, I don't know if you can see my, you might not be able to see my cursor, but if you look at these brighter colors that are these rectangles, those are lots, farms mostly. And then you notice Metro Madison is here. So there's where you would have had a lot of houses and a lot of a lot of business operations. Marshes. Notice the dark color. Those are probably wooded areas, maybe loblolly pine, second growth. These areas, though, that are kind of a light gray up toward the middle of the top of the image, that would be marshy. I don't know if you see this, but if you look at the middle of the image and you see that marshy area in the middle, and then look below it, and it looks like it has like whiskers pointing to the south. Do you see those little lines? Let me see if I can help you here. Here's a close-up. First, you have in the middle, you have the 1865 map, and you see little lines again.
Mhm.
And then you go to back to a blow-up of the coastal survey map. You see all those lines? And then you see the lines up above in the upper right-hand corner. So what might we have going on here? What are those little lines representing, possibly?
Flooding areas?
Mm-hmm.
Areas that flood regularly?
The potentially could flood. So what do you do about that if you have a community or a farm? What are you going to do about that so it doesn't flood?
Not what do you call them? Not the, oh gosh, I can't think of the term for it. Piers or wood, you try to stop it with wood
Bulkhead.
Yeah,
bulkheads.
you could do that.
Okay.
Bulkheads, but you may not want to use a lot of your wood, because that's a valuable resource that you're putting into the, your boats and things like that, or your day-to-day. Here where I come from, we do it with dirt. We shovel ditch banks, maybe even a ditch to help in draining the marsh on the other side. So these may suggest areas that were berms, ditch banks that were built up to prevent occasional flooding. So even back then, there was the possibility that Mother Nature, once in a blue moon, with the right nor'easter or something, could give you some trouble. And in fact, if you look at the photo from Google Earth, in the middle there, you'll see a similar kind of configuration of trees, but also you'll see the marsh up there, that dark brown color. And even the marsh, interestingly, you'll see the marsh in areas that may have been farmed at one point or another. And now they don't seem, a few of those areas have been abandoned, probably because they were not, they couldn't sustainably keep them. Also, the other thing I want you to notice here is that nowadays you don't see the same kinds of activities going on that you would have seen in the time of Harriet Tubman. So the place is a bit more of a retreat for people, who have their vacation homes, etc. But imagine what it might have been like. Again, this is one of those things where you can close your eyes and try to imagine how it looked. A saw pit before they had a steam saw, the crib for building a boat, and perhaps a bit of mercantile activity as well, with sailing ships and all, buying whatever is available in that area. And I want you to imagine, this is the kind of exercise I try to do and I try to encourage. You go to a place like that and you close your eyes, and then you try all of your senses, maybe not necessarily touch, although you could try that too in your imagination. But, smell not only the salt air, but smell the wood being worked. Listen to not only the birds, but listen to the hammering, listen to the sawing back and forth, back and forth. And then with your mind's eye, look at the dry dock, look at the saw pit, and kind of imagine this being a major source of revenue. I give quotes in the book that from the Baltimore Sun that attest, this Baltimore Sun, that attest in Harriet Tubman's time to how good these boats were. They're saying, wow, if your schooners are as good as that, you're certainly welcome in our harbor at any time. This wasn't scuzzy looking stuff. Okay.
One
So
picture.
can we imagine Harriet Tubman? And we certainly could, because again, this is the era of her life where she is doing hard physical labor. She's compact, she is tough. And they say she could cut as much as any male wood chopper, and then some, because as long as she met her responsibility for her annual, the fee that would be paid out to Mrs. Brodess, or her son in this case, actually her son, Edward Brodess, as long as that money was there in December, she could moonlight as much as she wanted to and make extra money. And in her first year, however she did it, cutting more wood, doing other errands, you name it, she made enough to buy a team that could help her move logs for her father. Imagine that. In today's, how would you compare that with somebody today? Making enough money to buy a tractor trailer or something like that,
At least a pickup truck.
Yeah, at least a pickup truck. So she must have been a very good axewoman, but also she would not only cut up the cordwood, because good quality oak cordwood would have a market. You'd fill up a boat with cordwood, go to Baltimore and make a nice profit, good quality. And then locally, if you wanted to, you could cut down a few loblollies. They wouldn't be very good, but people, if they wanted firewood on the cheap, they could do that. Okay, but the question is, if you're cutting large pieces of timber for the shipbuilding industry, since even though you have woods, they're probably second growth woods, how are you going to get that stuff? How are you going to get those big timbers to your shipyards?
Float them down the river?
Yeah, if you have a river. And you certainly could float them down the little chop tank to get to Madison, where the action is. But if not, let's go out a little farther west where we get to Parsons Creek and access to some wonderful timberlands. And here's the Coastal Survey map again. And you'll see a bit of marsh, you'll see a bit of a forest, but you also see another interesting thing. Do you see where that arrow is?
Mhm.
Do you see the straight line
Yeah.
where that arrow is? That is Stewart's Canal. You may have heard about it. That was the canal that was dug on what was originally Parsons Creek to be able to provide access to the timberlands up the way.
Yeah.
And this was not the Panama Canal. This was not a big operation, but it would get you there. And however they did it, by hiring or by having a work gang within your own community of enslaved people, they got it done. And I just wanted to show you a couple of things here. Harriet Tubman could have brought the lumber to the canal with her steers. And we talk about what it takes to drive a steer, both from a 19th century perspective, but also even a modern perspective. We've interviewed a couple of teamsters. But also note how you could move things along a canal. That picture in the middle is from Holland, but it kind of reflects a story about Harriet Tubman, where she was such a tough customer by that time, so buff that Stewart would make bets with his buddies. And he would say, Harriet could move a barge full of stone. And we would imagine a barge full of timber as well. And they'd say, oh, come on, a girl, a woman, heck with that. And he'd say, put your money on the barrelhead. And he'd say, Harriet, would you be able to move this? And maybe he would have a gratuity for her. And she would do it right away. And he made a lot of money off of Harriet, off of bar bets, if you can imagine that. I mean, that's, we can kind of laugh at it, but she was a tough lady. And maybe in her own way, that was her way to show how tough she was. But as you can see from the the right-hand picture, this is from the Dismal Swamp Canal. You could also track logs in various ways if they were floatable. So she may have been involved one way or another in using that canal. And I want to show you a couple of other later views. Notice in the one here in the middle that there's a bit of an island. I don't know if you can notice that right at the road. And where you see the arrow in the middle of this image, that is that island. I'm pointing to that island. It looks like a triangular shaped thing. If you see it a little differently, you would actually see, this narrow band of land, and then two channels on either side. You can see it better, I think, on the left-hand side, but it's so murky you might not be able to see it. I've tried to guess at what that island was used for. Does anybody want to have a go at that? Why would you put that island at the mouth of your canal?
To rest. I was going to say rest, but that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Separate the two-way traffic.
Yeah, possible. I'll just go out on a limb and suggest something, which is that you might have been able to float one of your larger boats in on one side, and then brought in your smaller skiffs on the other side, and or you could just pile stuff up on the island and then bring in your larger boat, maybe to load. I don't know. But one way or another, remember, you've got a few miles to go to get to the shipyard. And the best way to do that would have been to transship at that point from the canal to a larger boat and then follow the little chop tank. Now, the last thing you notice is on the bottom right-hand side. That's one of your famous ghost forests. Why do you think all of that beautiful timber has died on us?
Ground. That's right, rising sea level.
Yeah, a lot of things. Let me show you one of the, let me give you one other suggestion, because you're not wrong, but there's a lot going on here. This is a picture from 1877. Originally, Stewart got a permission to make a U-shaped canal. Then the canal actually would have gone all the way back to Madison, but that was not the case as far as we know at the time of Harriet Tubman. But eventually, here's this U-shaped canal. So when you have a canal like this, at two different locations on a tidal river, what happens as a result?
Well, water's going to rise and fall with the tide.
Yeah. So the water might flush one way, and then as the tide, continues to go upriver, it may flush the other way. There may have been a possibility here that there was flushing back and forth through this canal, which was bringing in slightly salty water, which was not going to do the woods any good. Now, if you add to that at the very bottom of the picture, you notice I've kind of cut it off there where there's a right angle. That is right near a washout area of the upper Blackwater River. So add to that tidal activities stemming from Fishing Bay, which is even more extreme in terms of differences in high and low tide, and you could have water, water flushing back and forth to the degree that today the Blackwater Refuge has created a weir to try to stop some of that. Okay, let's go. You were talking about maps. 1922 soil survey map. You'll see that the marsh is in green. You'll see that the woodlands are kind of in a hatch pattern, and then you'll see farmlands are kind of in a yellow. And notice the arrow where the Blackwater meets the Little Blackwater. Okay, you see?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's where it is today. So Blackwater has become Lake Blackwater, and you can even see the widened mouth of the Little Blackwater River.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the areas compromised by all that tidal flow, not to mention sea level rise, not to mention storms. Those things have all opened up, in the course of a century,
Right.
Although it, probably started a little bit beforehand. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but these are 3 shots we have in the final section. You look at Martinet, 1865, Blackwater, Little Blackwater. And this is the one you might have mentioned earlier, 1977. Look how the Blackwater looks like it's been hit with buckshot in the middle image. Now, let's slam it. Let's slam it in 2100 using a somewhat conservative estimate. You can't see the sign. You can't see the arrow if you've got your tiles where mine are. But that's going to be on the edge of the southern edge of Dorchester County.
Scary.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so where do you go from here? What I would suggest, I hope I've made this a worthwhile and interesting exercise, but go anywhere on the Underground Railroad byway. There are lots of ways you can get the details. There are guides, there are audio guides, there's, a number of books, including the books by Sarah Bradford Hopkins. And then when you've done your homework, read the landscape deeply from background to foreground, the way you would judge a beautiful Dutch landscape. Then close your eyes and begin to do your deep focus. Imagine the sights, the sounds, the smells from the mid-19th century. And then see if the deep focus helps you to get a handle on how the world has changed from the time of Harriet Tubman's time. And then if you want, you can even project in the future and imagine what you'd see if you, rather than Harriet Tubman, were to get into that time machine and come back in 2125. I'll leave that to you and your imagination. So back to the quote: is it virtually unchanged, virtually unaltered, and depends on your definition of virtual. Is virtual almost? Yeah, I'll buy that. Or even better, is it a replicated version of something real? Well, I've suggested in deep focus, you can replicate something that might have been real back in the time of Harriet Tubman. So I'm willing to argue then that Harriet Tubman's landscape, in fact, is virtually unaltered, but only if you take the time to do a deep focus, shut your eyes, and imagine how it would have been, for better and for worse. So that's my story, folks. Like I said, there's a lot to read, there's a lot to listen to, and I hope this helps you and whets your appetite for exploring the land of Harriet Tubman even further. So that's it. If you have any quick questions, I'll be happy to take them. Otherwise, you're welcome to get in touch with me via email. And again, thanks for your interest. You're exploring this landscape along with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to count 5, and then we should all, I guess, go ahead and say our goodbyes, and then look forward to seeing you in person or virtually, however it works out. And all the best to all of you as we get to the end of the year and the festive season. Okay.